So.
Mr. Ambassador, let us start. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us over here. It's really lovely. I hope we can see each other on 29th of October.
Yes, of course.
As you mentioned before, but let's get to the agenda. Today, the world is following the news from Turkey, and everyone is in deep grief because of the Ankara blasts. And I want to accept my condolences as well to the families of those victims over there. But we need to try to understand what is going on, and also what impact could that do to the not only the region, the Middle East and Turkey, but also to the European Union and probably to the global map. So let's start with what is going on inside. We want to understand what are the crucial internal challenges for now for the Turkey. Would you try to describe those, please?
Thank you. First, let me thank you for your expressions of condolences. Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people have also done the same. People have brought flowers to our embassy. Children have left messages, so that's very much appreciated. Indeed, not only Turkey, but this part of the world is going through crisis-filled times, unfortunately. And this has been happening for several years now. It just happens that in Turkey, we are so-called between two elections. We had an election some months ago, but the political parties were not able to form a coalition, and by law, by the constitution, there we need to have a second election, which will take place on the 1st of November. The thing about Turkish politics is that people have been voting into office and out of office government since 1950. The governments are used to this, people are used to this. You can have all sorts of crises, but it's democracy which finds the solution at the end. Unfortunately, our part of the world, especially our southern neighbors, have been going through deep crises over the last few years. There is a power vacuum. And those who would not want to see perhaps Turkey stay as an island of stability, want to interfere. They want to somehow export the problems in the Middle East to Turkey. And this is a sensitive time for Turkey because of politics, so they've been trying to abuse this. Turkish people are used to this sort of challenges. It's painful. It's hurting, but we'll just have to deal with it. Terrorism is not a problem only for Turkey, it's an international problem. And we've seen different sorts of terrorism launched against us. We will do our best within the law to deal with this issue.
Within the law to deal with this issue? To deal with whom? With the Islamic State for now, or with the Kurds?
Let me put it this way. We've known about aggressive nationalist terrorism. We've known about terrorism based on an unreliable interpretation of religion. We've known terrorism based on ideology. We've seen it all. In this sense, again, we have forms of these. Indeed, the organization, the strange, nebulous organization that is called Daesh, is now a great threat, and we will deal with it as all countries ought to. The thing about terrorism, and we've been telling our partners and everyone around the world, even before 9/11, terrorism is serious. There is no creed, there is no religion, there is no ethnicity of terrorism. Terrorism is terrorism. As a method, you cannot just condone it in any way. Good terrorist, bad terrorist. After 9/11, people maybe began to understand it more, but as we find it here now, Daesh is very dangerous. We shouldn't be talking about Kurds, by the way. That would be very unfair. There are elements within the Kurdish people who resort to terrorism. A minority, unfortunately, very dangerous. So let's not make that confusion lead to the confusion. It would be unfair to everybody. And we will fight with whoever is going to attack Turkey or tries to blow up bombs in Turkey. And I think our partners and allies know about this.
Do you believe what the media and the foreign experts are saying, that Erdogan and the government could have prevented the blasts in Ankara, but they didn't follow the lead on ISIS terrorists or something like that?
There is a lively debate in Turkey, a democratic country. This happens. Some of this, I think, is speculation. I am privy, I know about the information that I can see. We understand the dangers of Daesh and others for a long time. We've been trying to deal with that. But after they started to have apparently attacks in Turkey, our efforts doubled. But please look at the last years of the Middle East. Look at our neighbors. Turkey is not Switzerland. Look at the border, people trying to coming in. We have 2 million refugees from Syria, 200,000 from Iraq. We've had this in the last 2 years. So it's difficult. We're doing our best because we just don't want to stop people at the border just because this would be something difficult to manage. We have to let them in, as this is what our conscience requires. We had to let them in. We let them in. We tried to control things as much as possible, but these organizations have developed very asymmetrical capabilities, and we'll just have to deal with it. It would be very unwise for any government to know that there are some terrorist elements and not to do anything about it. I think there are conspiracy theories work too much in our part of the world. This I think is too much articulated, and I am sometimes surprised that it also finds reflection in other countries. But we know what we are doing. It's difficult, it's painful, and we'll do better.
Following the Syrian crisis, the official position of your government, if I understand correctly, Assad's regime should leave. The Syria is possible. Syria is only possible when there is no Bashar Assad in place. As I understand, Erdogan went to Putin to visit him in Moscow to open the Grand Mosque over there. But also we've heard the rumors that they've had negotiations on how to make the transition period for Bashar Assad more smoother, I would say. Is that so?
The Syrian problem is not an academic problem for us. It's next door. And see where we are now. We didn't start the problems in our neighbors over the last few years. We found them next to us, and we'll have to deal with it. Our foreign policy is, in essence, of course, based on realism. However, there are idealist issues that we just cannot ignore. There's an idealist part of our foreign policy. We cannot just treat a government which is killing its own people with cluster bombs, and causing 300,000 people of its country to die just like that. Treat them as they are just normal interlocutors. 4 million people had to leave Syria. 15 million are displaced. 300,000 people are dead. Can you imagine that? What's happening in Ukraine, how many people are dead, and still this is a big crisis that you are dealing with justifiably. And this is happening right next to our border. So we gave the benefit of the doubt to the regime as much as possible. We really wanted to integrate the international community. And some of our allies and partners weren't sure about that. But they said, let's try. We've tried as much as we could. But when there's a lack of democracy, when there's lack of accountability, apparently those leaderships don't know the limits of what they can do. And that's why, yes, it's very difficult as far as I can see, a solution to the issue if things continue, if the leadership is doing the same things as it is. And you need, as in Ukraine, a new politics in Syria. I don't know how it is possible with the present regime, But there are people in Syria, there are political forces who want a more democratic, more inclusive system. And we think the future of Syria is that. So it would be it is appropriate for us to try to convince other international actors to see this. We have been looking for a safe zone, for example. I mean, it's just unfair that planes are bombing people. Planes are bombing people, these cluster bombs, children are dying. I mean, why are these people on their way to, to Turkey, to Europe? Do you remember that boy who was washed ashore in
Sure.
Turkey? I mean, why are they running? Is this just some hobby? No, because there are terrible regimes, there are terrible governments, and they are not changing their position. So we'll just have to make a choice when it comes to that.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned that you cannot stay aside when the planes are bombing the people on the ground. For now, as
chemical attacks,
of course, but I wanna get to today's day. Mm-hmm. As you may have known, and you definitely do, Russian airstrikes are being conducted every day, not only on targets of ISIS, but also other rebel groups that are not supporting the regime of Bashar Assad. And as the media suggests, a lot of people dying who are not military people. Regular citizens are dying. So I would say this is the same act of inhumanity as the regime of Bashar Assad did and still doing while bombing regular people in Syria. Do you support that, or you do not support that?
We do not support it in the following sense. I told you how sensitive the situation is, how the international community is having meetings after meetings, contacts to find some solution to it. And suddenly you have another actor coming and bombing. That complicates things, even if it's well intended. So these unilateral, I think, steps are complicating and they're not helpful. And we've told this, of course, to our Russian interlocutors at the highest level. I mean, this is happening right across next to our border, and coming from kilometers away, and complicating the issue is, of course, is the least we need at this moment. So we will continue to speak with Russia, with the Russian leadership, and we will continue to tell what we think is being done in a wrong way. That's what we would do with everybody, and that's indeed why we're speaking with our American allies and European allies about the same thing.
Greater involvement of Russian air forces and ground forces would only make it even more complex.
I would think so. I mean, and at the same time, we are a NATO country, and we, for the time being, we don't seem to need NATO support. Militarily, we are, at this stage, we don't feel that, but the alliance has proved itself the most, I think, durable and reliable alliance. And should we need anything, should there be a threat to us coming from Syria, Iraq, or another country, of course, we will also be asking the help of our allies. We're not there, but we appreciate the effort, the support, the solidarity that's been expressed for us. But I hope things will not get there. I always want to look at the better scenarios. Better scenario for us is absolutely somehow these foreign elements that trying to change the balance in Syria from its natural course will be defeated. The people's legitimate democratic demands will be the mainstream, as it ought to be, and Syria starts stabilizing itself. We hope the same for, of course, Iraq. And on our part, we consider ourselves, an island of democracy and stability, a country destined, a country wanting to become an EU member, a NATO member. So, which of course appreciated normally by the elites of these countries around us. They want the space of prosperity and stability of Europe also to come to their borders with Turkey. and it will happen. It will take some time, I think, but it will happen. We'll have to be patient, but we'll have to be resolute at the same time.
You mentioned Ukraine, and as you mentioned before we started the interview, that your main business here is actually Ukraine and Turkish relations. So let us go there for some time. You are following, of course, the conflict in eastern Ukraine, and how satisfied are you yourself and your country with the latest negotiations that have been done in Paris?
Mm-hmm. Well, the good thing about the latest, of course, developments is that the Minsk process, which we believe is very important, is being preserved. The parties involved want to preserve it as far as we can see, because that is the solution. Talking about it, finding mutually acceptable solutions, based on, of course, the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the independence of Ukraine. Those are the musts, those cannot change. And whatever the solution Ukrainians will accept for their country has to be their democratic choice. And all the talk, for example, about decentralization, all that is happening and should happen, not because something was signed in Minsk, agreed in Minsk, but because it's for the good of the Ukrainian people. As long as that I think path is followed, we are hopeful. We have a roadmap is probably emerging. That's why we want to support it, because that is that seems to be a reasonable way forward. And the more it is extended, the more people die, the more suffering, it will be more difficult to remedy it in the future. So we are for it, of course.
The position of your government on Crimean Tatar issues after the Crimea annexation?
The Crimean Tatars have been experiencing such a painful period in their history. Just when they thought perhaps, finally something much more substantive is going to happen, a more sensitive political system is going to be established towards them. Their rights will be finally fully restored. This crisis happened. And they are our brothers and sisters. Historically, we feel very close to them. I mean, there are 280,000, maybe 300,000 Crimean Tatars in Crimea, whereas there are maybe perhaps 10 times more people of Crimean Tatar origin in Turkey. So biggest diaspora is in Turkey. They are in all spheres of life. Of course, we feel very close to them, and when they feel suppressed, when they feel they are wronged, we feel it too. What Turkey did was a group of an unofficial delegation was sent to Crimea. They had a report published, and this report of the unofficial delegation very much confirms some of the other reports that were around. The leadership of the Crimean Tatars, unfortunately, cannot go back to their historical homeland. That's why they have to be in Kiev, and a main part of my job has become that. That's one of my main portfolios. I meet them often. I hear many things, and I report it back to Ankara. Ankara is my country is very concerned about this. Crimea is their historical homeland. They need to live there with universal standards, with human rights, and we will try to get that as much as possible. But overall, for Crimea, the solution is territorial integrity of course, Ukraine international law. And we are far from it, but we stand by Ukraine, of course, in the international forum on this issue, as do so many other countries.
So far, for Ukrainian integrity and for our independence. But their international laws are not working for some parts of this conflict, namely Russia, okay. So how would you see this conflict and also the Crimean Tatars issue would be resolved in nearest future?
It's difficult, of course, to speculate, but we have relations with Russia. Of course, it's an important partner for us. We've been trading with them over the years. It's a neighbor for us, and for Ukraine too, of course. We use our relations with Russia so that we can help Ukraine and we can help Crimean Tatars. That's an important channel we have. But having workable relations with Russia doesn't mean we agree with them. In fact, this is a channel where we allows our leadership to tell, to call a spade a spade. We have a saying in Turkish, the good friend tells the bitter truth. We tell the bitter truth when it is needed. I think the best way to sum it is we try to use our connection for the benefit of the Crimean Tatars and Ukraine. We do it by talking. We have to talk. We have to convince people, our interlocutors. But as a member of the UN, as a NATO member, of course, as a country, member of founding member of most European institutions, including the Council of Europe, Turkey is on the right side of history on this issue. But we are trying to point when there is something wrong, and we are trying to support who we feel are the victims. And it's that simple.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your time. I hope we'll see each other on 29th of October, and then we'll get more in contact later on. Fortunately, not because of any other blasts in your country or in the conflict in Ukraine. I hope we will meet on any other occasions.
Yes, please, let's do that. I'd be happy to see you on our National Day.